Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we're continuing our retrospective on Frankenstein in film with the 1935 follow-up to Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, directed by James Whale. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins. With me from Austin is Mr. Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth Studios, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also co-creator of Clockworks from Humanoids, which just came out last month. Also in Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, editor-in-chief of HorrorMovies.net, writer for Rockabilly Online, and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. And you know what actually struck me is that you're the editor for HorrorMovies.net, and Tony, in fact, is doing regular writing for HorrorMovies.net.
He is.
So it's all
Are you saying HorrorMovies.net or formovies.net?
HorrorMovies.net.
Okay.
Are you unaware?
No. I just wanted to clarify for the listening public.
HorrorMovies.net. Yeah.
This sounded very.
All right. And
horror. Like that. I'm just gonna record Tony saying that, and every time people click on the website, it's going to say that.
And awesome. You get all syllables.
I think you should have said it, Jason, when you were introducing Tony. I think you should have said Rise from Fire, like in your best Frankenstein voice.
Yeah. Although actually, that sounds to me like the crazy world of Arthur Brown. You know, I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you. And also, Julia.
You're trying to introduce me. I'm talking over you. Yes, Julia Guzman, attorney, color commentary. No, but I was thinking in terms of the Phil Hartman Frankenstein voice. You know.
Oh yes.
Yeah. It is hard to watch this after without thinking about Phil Hartman, actually.
Yeah. No,
I know, because obviously this is where he got his impression from, not from the first movie.
Absolutely.
Okay, anyway, you can go on, because I already introduced myself.
No, it's fine. Okay, according to Wikipedia, Bride of Frankenstein, advertised as The Bride of Frankenstein, is a 1935 American sci-fi horror film, the first sequel to Universal Pictures' 1931 hit Frankenstein. As with the first movie, it's directed by James Whale. It stars Boris Karloff. This one features Elsa Lanchester both as the bride, although oddly enough she's uncredited as the bride.
And she's only in it for 5 minutes.
Indeed.
As the bride.
And as Mary Shelley. Colin Clive comes back as Henry Frankenstein, and we also have Ernest Essinger as Dr. Septimus Pretorius, which is such a delightful name. The other thing.
Reminder on that, we have to tell the public about our Pretorius thing we're working on.
Oh God,
Universal Monsters, because it reminded me when we get to Pretorius, this movie reminded me how stupid all of that was. So
yes, we'll get to that ASAP. As a matter of fact, okay. Here's the thing. This movie, and we're about to go into our opening thoughts, and I think this time we did Drew first last week because Drew has insisted that we do the Frankenstein retrospective, but
which it was due time. It was past due time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But I think this time we're going to have Tony do the first impressions. Tony, Drew, Julia, and then I'll say anything, whatever's left, and then we'll go into it. The last thing I would say in the introduction is that this movie is by many considered maybe the finest Universal horror film, and it is many people's favorites, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And we'll talk about whether or not that's deserved, whether in fact this is the finest of the Universals. So, Tony, give us a brief opening thoughts on The Bride of Frankenstein.
Well, that's a weird. I wouldn't say this is the finest. It is so much weirder than I remembered. From just opening of last time on Frankenstein.
Yes.
By the way, we're going to explain to you about the novel as well as hey, we're also just going to not do the novel again, but kind of say that we are. And just, yeah, I don't know. It's a strange movie. Like,
and also there will be some tiny little slave people in it.
Yeah, it goes on so many. It gets a lot of things right and goes in so many bizarre places as far as cinematography goes, and as far as a memorable character. Like, people remember the bride. It's such an iconic, amazing image, especially for how long she is on screen. Like, you think that the whole thing is her, but not really.
5 minutes.
But yeah, it is a really bizarre movie in so many ways. I don't know if it's the finest. Certainly memorable, but it's strange in what it does for the books, and then just how we're going to just go do this other thing that's in there.
Yeah.
It's a strange one. But lots of great, like, memorable characters, and lots of mugging by character actors chewing up the scenery.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Thank you. That's a good kickoff. Drew, bring it. What do you say to that?
First of all, they couldn't do, like, I mean, if I'm going to retort to some of the things that Tony says, I'll save a lot of it for when we actually get into the meat of the movie. But I will say this. They couldn't do, like, the exact book because this is a sequel to the Universal Frankenstein. However, there was a purpose for Whale tacking that on. There was actually a layered purpose, which I will get into. But as far as my personal feelings on this film, this is actually my favorite Universal Monsters film. I probably like the Wolfman more as a character, but this is just such an artistic achievement on so many levels, and I like it even better than the first Frankenstein because, I mean, that's a that's a great film, but this is like light years ahead of that in terms of, you know, sets, the effects in it. It's a beautiful film, and of course, Dr. Pretorius, who may be the best mad scientist in the history of a film. Like, he's just such a gloriously wicked character, and, you know, a real joy to watch. I adore this movie. I mean, I'm gonna have to fall into, you know, the legions of slathering fans on this. I watch it pretty regularly. I think, you know, like, yes, is it a weird movie? Yeah, but I would definitely file it under weird good instead of weird bad. I like how berserk and strange this movie is, and I'm glad it is the way it is.
I wouldn't say it's bad. It's certainly strange, especially considering, like, I mean, of course they can't make it a sequel. They've already done a huge chunk of the book, you know. I mean, they couldn't just remake the book. That's not how it's done. So I understand, like, why they made choices. But, I mean, it's not like the book had tiny Munchkin people or an extra doctor or any number of crazy things that that it has, you know. And a resurrected monster from who just happens to fall in the bottom of the windmill from the previous thing, you know, all this stuff. Like, but as far as beautiful and as far as just extremely well made, of course, like, no, it's quite the achievement.
Julia, where are you landing when it comes to Brides of Dracula? Brides of Dracula. Bride of Frankenstein.
Dracula on the brain.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't add a lot to what the guys have said. It's that, you know, it's beautiful visually. There's so many interesting shots. I kept saying that. I kept going, wow, it's a great shot. God, that's a beautiful shot. This is the greatest cinematography in this film. Because it's just I love the over-the-top drama of it all. And so, yeah, and for sure the visual. I mean, it's, you know, the effect of the bride, but also of Pretorius. You know, he's just so interesting, and, like, the monster is a little different than he is in the first movie because he was going to speak. They couldn't take he couldn't take his bridge out of his mouth because he wouldn't have been able to speak normally. so he looks different. It's just a different. Yeah.
Well, he also had been eating better because at this point he was a movie star, so he had gained weight.
Yeah. Yes and no. Yes, he had been gaining weight, but he actually lost 20 pounds while making the film because he was so. Like just from the heaviness of the costume and all the work. Plus, he had hurt his leg getting out of the when he fell in the water. He slipped into the water or something like that, and he actually got injured. So there's a lot of reasons why he ends up losing like 20 pounds in this. And interestingly, also the doctor had broken his leg right before this, and so that's why he's sitting all the time. But anyway, so there's all this kind of unfortunate stuff that surrounded that film. But it's weird. I have to agree with both of you guys that there's just some odd things, and the beginning is very weird. It's the whole thing where the Shelleys are sitting around with Lord Byron and being all gay and having the outfits, the clothing totally threw me. I'm always confused about what era, what decade any given.
You mean throughout the film?
Throughout the whole thing.
Sequence.
The beginning. They seem to be. What year did you say they were?
Perfectly adequate. That's 1816.
1816. Okay, so their clothing is correct, but then the rest of it kind of feels. Sometimes it almost feels like it's
there
like
was
1940s.
There was cut dialogue that was actually supposed to explain that, where Mary Shelley was going to talk about how the story was intended to predict. Why it was like technology and predict aspects of the future, which now having learned that, it puts the whole Universal Monsters series to me in this strange place, because now I'm thinking, okay, is this entire shared universe with all these monsters in the imagination of Mary Shelley as played by Elsa Lanchester? As like is this entire universe just swimming around in her head? Like that's as a fan, that's put me in a weird position. Like I've been thinking about that a lot because I just learned that within the last few days, and I've been like fascinated by the idea of that.
That is a wonderful concept, because this, I've often said that the Hammerscape is a very strange universe that is completely unmoored from any actual concept of time or geography. But the universal landscape is also unmoored, and in this movie alone, you got the really fine, perfectly adequate Regency period stuff. I love that opening with Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron hanging out, being hams, and
Byron is super ham. Jeez, has anyone ever been as full of himself as the obnoxiousness of that Byron?
George Gordon, Lord Byron, with his cigar and his high-waisted pants and the whole thing. They're hanging out at the Via Diodati, and I guess this is intended to be the legendary, weekend of ghost stories, the haunted summer
that we based our parties on. We haven't done it in a while, but we used to have Halloween parties called Polidori parties that were based on that idea of just everybody writing stories. And
hanging out at this party. And I think this movie is probably the very first film to dramatize the haunted summer. Yeah, and that's pretty impressive. So that's pretty cool. But that's just a framing device. It's an excuse for Mary to go, well, yeah, and we're completely divorced from the book at this point. I should mention that the haunted summer first appeared in the popular imagination because Mary told the story of it in the introduction to the 1831 edition of Frankenstein, which was a significant rewrite of the book Frankenstein, because she originally wrote it in 1818, and then in 1831 she made a lot of edits, a lot of cuts. The book is a very different edition, but nevertheless she added on this introduction that said, I was hanging out for the summer on the shores of Lake Geneva with my husband and Lord Byron and this annoying guy Polidori. And Claire Godwin, and they told the stories. So it's pretty cool. This is history in the making that we're seeing right here.
And so for some reason we decided to go with the annoying guy to name our party after him.
Yes, that's right.
the reason apparently why that Whale wanted to have this is the apparently, if you believe this, is that he wanted to show that pretty people could have evil thoughts, and that's sort of the way that Mary Shelley is portrayed here. She's very dainty and girlish, and
Sure.
apparently though they cut a lot. There was about 5 minutes of the scene that's cut, and it's lost because the censors found her cleavage to be a bit much.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, they also should cut it just because you got to get moving. I mean, this thing.
Yeah.
This is a framing device. It's
But what does she say? She says something interesting, and I can't remember exactly what she says about why she wrote the story at the end there.
It's a moral lesson to show that man should not emulate God.
Oh, there you go. That's
what a bunch of bullshit.
No, I liked it.
Yeah,
it's a lot of EC Comics stuff there.
I'm just saying it might very well be EC Comics. It has nothing to do with Mary Shelley. That's for sure. Actually, I should be clear. Probably the Mary Shelley who wrote the 1830 edition of Frankenstein might have agreed with that sentiment, but the 18-year-old girl who wrote it in 1818 did not agree. And so anyway, there we go. But the point is, we got the Regency fashions, but then through the rest of the thing, we've got this wacko world with peasants who dress like 17th century peasants, and then we've got the townspeople, like the upper crust, who wear like Fred Astaire style white tie and tails all the time. Women who wear pillbox hats and sort of mid 1930s-ish Hollywood suits, and it is crazy town. It is a really remarkable world. We open up on the same once we go into the story. And Drew, you're right, because the great thing about having it all in Mary Shelley's head is anything that is wrong with the story, any continuity issue or whatever, it doesn't matter because it's all in Mary Shelley's imagination.
I can't wait. If you think this has continuity issues, I can't wait till we do Son of Frankenstein.
Because here's where we are. If you recall, and as Tony mentioned, this movie recaps a lot from previously on Frankenstein. The last movie ended with Frankenstein and the monster fighting in the big old windmill while peasants tried to burn it down. And the monster tossed Dr. Frankenstein off the windmill. He crashed against the arms of the windmill, fell to the ground, and then we cut rapidly to a to an ending scene where they would go, oh, he lived and they're going to have a baby. And that's the end of the movie. In this one, she winds up, whoop, 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 whoop. We're back at the windmill once again. This time, Frankenstein falls, they drag him away, and they think he's going to die, which I think makes all the sense in the world. And we follow the monster as he, apparently, crashes. We find out he crashes into a cavern below. But here's what's weird about what goes on with Dr. Frankenstein. By the time we get back to him, and this is the same night, by the time we get back to him, he is recovering. Maybe that takes a couple of weeks, I don't know. But his father is dead, off screen, somewhere between these two films.
Well, there was apparently dialogue, again, cut. There's a lot of stuff that they cut out of this movie. Dialogue implying that the old Baron died when someone told him that his son was dead, and the shock of it killed him. I think the thing wasn't at all. But I think the thing that's important to remember about this movie at the time that it came out is, unlike us, who we can watch the original Frankenstein last week, and then we can come in and do this one this week. So we have that movie fresh on our mind. They're not going to have that. They're not going to be able to go back and rewatch the first Frankenstein. They're unless they're for some whatever reason, some theater decided to show it, they don't have that option. The TV isn't a thing. DVD sure as hell isn't a thing. Yeah. So people aren't going to be as concerned about the continuity. They may not even remember it as much.
Yeah, no, I think you've nailed it right there. I think there's a perfectly innocent notion here that we expect that everybody will have the broad outlines in their memory, but that basically, you sit down for a movie, it's Friday night, you're going to watch a whole 3-hour evening involving the feature film and the newsreel and the cartoon and probably maybe even a short feature before this one. And this is just part of the entertainment, and it is going to sit by itself. It's, this is another Frankenstein story, and so how well it fits in with the previous one, you're right, it doesn't matter. They've got a new actress.
None of these have amazing, while all of these take place in the same sort of continuity, none of them have amazing continuity with each other. I mean, it is kind of important to remember that, and as they go along, continuity gets even less and less important.
It's really interesting. And yet, they actually do make an attempt at tracking more or less what happens to the monster. So that when we find the monster here, and okay, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the thing that disturbed me most. I'm not saying I don't like the film, but my big shock watching it is I've heard Neil Gaiman say this is a movie that enchanted me and has always astounded me all this time, and all these different, really eminent people are always going on about the majesty and beauty of this movie. And I think that a lot of that is deserved. But the monster is totally different. I was really disturbed by the fact that the first thing we see the monster do is straight up murder the guy who was looking for his little girl. He just drowns him, like for the hell of it. And then goes up and
drags him. Is it for the hell of it?
I can't
They just
tell.
attacked him. They let him on fire.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But what that means is that the monster in this one, when we find him at the beginning, and maybe this is the point of the story, because we're going to see him soften, is his arc is when we find him at the beginning, he has become a really vicious monster.
Well, it's that I agree with Drew that it's not that it's for the hell of it. It's vengeance, it's anger, it's adrenaline, it's whatever.
They did just try to burn him.
Supposed to be dead.
You know how it is. Even if somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're like, you just get all amped up. Imagine if they deliberately trying to drive you out, run you off the road.
Yeah.
I will say that I do think that the monster is scariest out of any version of Frankenstein that I've ever seen. The bit that you're describing, the murder of this man, is the most frightening. Also just the way Jack Pierce did the makeup, because they actually show that some of his hair has been burnt off.
Yeah.
Visually, you can see, because of the frayed hair, you can see more clamps on his forehead. He looks very scary here.
It looks like an evolution of the first one, and like he is the same monster, but who's been through some, and that is impressive, right?
And they actually show his hair growing back through the movie. I mean, that's pretty cool.
I didn't think about that. I guess you're right. Now, as you pointed out, Boris Karloff has gained weight, so he looks jowlier. He's a bigger monster than he was last time. And he's got that bridge back in his mouth, so he doesn't have the weird sunken cheek look that he had before. So there are changes, but
it took 5 hours to do his makeup.
And by the time they're doing it on Bela Lugosi, they're going to have it down, like, to a much simpler process. Bela Lugosi and Glenn Strange, it's going to be much simpler. But, and I can't remember why. I think for one thing, they figured out a headpiece that Glenn Strange and Bela Lugosi.
Well, they actually were starting to do the headpiece in this. It was quite as an advance. By the time you get the Son of Frankenstein, they had the headpiece down. But I also have something I want to throw in there, just food for thought for you, Jason. My take on this always has been that the monster in the first film is an infant. The monster we see here is a petulant, libidoous teenager. I mean, there's even, and I don't want to jump too far into that scene, but there is even a scene where he gets drunk and he appears to get stoned.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, the monster, to me, I mean, really, I know we've already said this, but I really kept seeing this monster as Phil Hartman during the scene when he's with his friend, you know, in the cave. He just with learning to speak and drinking and smoking and
I think more about young Frankenstein.
Yeah, there's both. I mean, the fire bad thing that Phil Hartman has to do is directly from here, like directly. Yeah. Fire bad. That's
memory.
It was this. Like there wasn't quite that same thing in Young Frankenstein. It's directly here. So.
Well, and once again, we'll see Karloff doing his fabulous pantomime. You know, Karloff, who later we think of as being a movie host and a TV host, and the narrator of Peter and the Wolf and all that stuff. That's just all about that beautiful voice that he has, where all he has to do is just sort of wear a smoking jacket and talk. He's really talented here. You know, when the thing of later on when he's with the mute and he says, you know, put your hand on my shoulder or whatever it is, and he just to anything involving his arms, he just sort of lifts his arm up and just lays it down. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this sort of gangliness.
No gross motor skills.
Yeah, his body. Right. Yeah, he is very much to that extent still very much like a baby or an infant. But let's get there. First, we have the monster come around and kill the two people who are looking for he drowned the little girl accidentally last time, and that was a tragic moment. Now this is another tragedy because they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. If I'm going with you guys' thesis,
they're part of a lynch mob. They're not in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I guess you're right. You know, I just feel sorry for them. But my
I'm not saying it's not sad. I'm not saying it's not sad. I'm just saying he's not attacking them unprovoked. They straight up lit him, are part of a lynch mob that lit him on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, you know. But anyway, he kills them both. None of this feels good. I mean, you have to admit, none of this is like.
No, but it's supposed to be frightening.
Yeah. So
I think one of my problems with Frankenstein monster is they make him too cuddly in other films because we sympathize with him too much. You know, Whale never did that. You know, like he's still, you know, a figure to be feared, even though you feel pity for him.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's a really good point. The way you said that often we don't include the horror and the fact that part of what makes a character like the Frankenstein monster or Lenny, for that matter, a figure of such pathos is that they're capable of doing horrible things, often because of their limitations, and that's part of the horror of it all. So, anyway, we now have a bit of comic relief. This is the thing that made me just cringe anytime this woman is on. You've got Minnie, who is this, I don't know what the hell she is. I guess she's a maid. She's a servant of Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Una O'Connor, who is I believe, an Irish or a Scottish actress. Whale used her a lot. She's also in the Invisible. Yeah, she's also in The Invisible Man, playing a very similar role. The reason why this character was included was because, again, this is the social nature of a film in the 1930s. Is they felt they needed something to soften up stuff like what had just happened previously, which is a guy being drowned and, you know, his wife soon follows suit. So they put this character, and I find her funny, but you know, your mileage may vary.
She certainly
they put this in there to lighten up the mood. Huh?
She certainly chews up the scenery.
Yeah.
Every time she's on screen, it's like, okay, we're getting some character acting. Lots of character acting. And she does that. I mean, that's her whole role. But wow,
that's what she's there for. She's definitely doing what she's directed to do. I'm not saying that. This is Whale's choice. He's really sort of doing this Shakespeare thing, right, where you've got imaginations, and you've got clowns. And so this is a clown, and
I would also argue that this is sort of the birth of the camp sensibility. I mean, we can certainly get more into that when we're talking about Pretorius, but this is definitely. I mean, Whale was a gay man, and this movie definitely has a very queer.
Oh my God!
To it.
There's a moment that when we get to Pretorius, there's a line Pretorius had that I thought was so funny and so ironic that it almost seemed like 30 years out of place. It was really brilliant.
Well, and apparently there's all kinds of lines cut from, like Drew was saying, from the original scene, the opening scene that kind of imply that they are all just an orgy, an ongoing orgy. They cut the line, we are all three infidels, scoffers at all marriage ties, believing only in living freely and fully. But the censors cut that. They were like,
right.
Yeah, you guys need to not be so free and full right now.
Yeah, so yes. So so in fact,
we'd like you to be at least 90% less full of each other as well. If you could just do that.
There is a
lot
of campiness. There's so much campiness going on because Colin Clive is very kind of campy. James Whale was himself a big fan of the camp sensibility, and we all saw the movie Gods and Monsters, and by all accounts, this was I know nothing of the guy Ernest Dessinger who plays Pretorius, but there is this sort of feeling of just this kind of rooster party of these guys just hanging out and just chatting gaily away. To take it all back to the Castle Frankenstein has reformed his ways. His newly recast Elizabeth and he are...
Who is now a brunette, and she's only 17 years old, the girl who plays her.
No way.
She's 35, yeah.
Wow. Well, anyway, nothing unusual for 1818, I imagine.
Yeah.
And they're gonna be very happy together. And into Frankenstein's life comes Dr. Pretorius. This skinny, very sort of congealed is the word that I want to use. He has this high voice that just sort of soothingly moves along. There's something kind of perverse about Pretorius, and we'll find out that that's true because he's committing all kinds of strange profanities against.
Well, he's got a great face too. Like he kind of looks almost like it's funny because Karloff voiced the Grinch, but he kind of looks like the Grinch when he grins, but he's also got an equally good scowl.
They light him beautifully.
I think he looks like the Joker with his hair all crazy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he would have been a marvelous. If you could have somehow time traveled him forward and do a live action version of the Frank Miller Joker, he would have been marvelous as that. I think. Whale had him also in the Old Dark House, which is another great horror picture of this time period, and he very very keeps saying have a potato and has this sort of same wickedness about him, but that character that he portrays in that is incredibly meek, whereas Pretorius is very, very quickly establishes himself as the alpha male of this movie, actually.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, it's a really amazing character. And to think this is the first time we've ever seen him, but we learned he's so interesting. Look at Whale makes him look literally like the most interesting creature in the entire film. He wears that white suit. He often wears a skull cap, which may be a reference to being an alchemist or maybe a reference to Judaism. We don't know. We don't know where this guy exactly is coming from. We don't know anything of his reputation. If I recall, Frankenstein knows him by reputation. So
he taught at the school that Frankenstein went to.
Right.
So
but he since
we are to believe that he was a peer of the Edward Van Sloan character from the first movie, and it's kind of interesting to think of the two of them interacting, like what that might have been like.
Right. No, that's an excellent point.
His name supposedly means Royal Seven, which is reference to the 7 deadly sins, apparently.
And that's what's most wonderful about him. He reminds me of a Noel Coward character, or something you would see in Dorian Gray or something like that, because he's always sort of making these snide comments about all the bad things that he's going to do and all the sins that he intends to commit. He's great. He's really interesting to look at. Anyway, he rolls in and he's like, Frankenstein, glad I found you. I've been really meaning to hook up with you so that we can start doing some more of your amazing experiments. Frankenstein's like, no, I don't do that anymore. No, go away. And Pretorius is basically just there to seduce Frankenstein back into the world of making monsters.
strong arming more than seduce.
Yes.
Like
eventually
he's gonna blackmail him. But so just as an aside, so what I still find funny, especially watching this movie, and it brought it all back. So when Jason and I were working on the Universal Monsters game that didn't ship, we wanted to Jason wanted to write Pretorius as the villain or as a character. And the Universal Games people just would not. And one of their arguments was, well, nobody knows Pretorius. They're like, nobody knows any of these characters, ancillary characters. Other than Frankenstein, Wolfman, and Dracula, no one knows anybody. So it doesn't matter, and this is a character you own. But it's even funnier is this time around, we could have introduced it exactly the same way, and I wish we would have used this argument. When we first meet Pretorius, they say his name like 24 times within the space of 5 minutes. Dr. Pretorius, what's his name? Dr. Pretorius. Oh, by the way, it's Dr. Pretorius. And they string his name out. If we would have written that as a gag in the game we were trying to make, people would have said, whoa, that is a lot. I mean, I understand we don't know him, but here it is. And it just was really funny that they introduce him and make him this solid, like, yes, we've said his name so many times. He is a part of this universe. And yet, Universal themselves would not let us use this guy, who it doesn't matter. And in fact, it would have made it better. Our argument was, well, it would have made it richer because the people who get it will get it. And the people who don't, it doesn't matter because it's just a name, you know.
Well,
it's just so weird, like how that all works out.
That was infuriating. But you hear that all the time. I mean, because you're right. Your argument is insurmountable. When you say, "Hey, Universal guys, you already own this name Pretorius. So as long as you're going to make something up, why not just make something up that you already own?" It makes total sense.
But
to me.
especially in the way that they introduce him here.
Yeah.
They say his name. It's repeated so rapid fire in the course of like 5 minutes that you're like, okay, man, no one forgets this. It's just so crazy.
The funny thing about that to me, every time, and I've been meaning to bring this up every time you guys have retold the story, and I'm glad I'm actually bringing it up while this is getting recorded, is that Universal was so gun-shy to use this character, even though they own it, and they didn't ultimately do it. Yet Kim Newman co-opted this character. He doesn't own him or whatever. He put him as a reoccurring character in his Anno Dracula books as basically the guy that has taught up every mad scientist from Frankenstein all the way up to Herbert West.
Yeah.
And he has no claim on that character whatsoever, but he didn't even think twice about doing it. And he even has them repeatedly say, "Would you like some gin? It's my only weakness." So, Universal cares so little about that character that they don't do anything about it.
Well, they sure don't. Well, they care so little yet until they do care, and they care enough not to let you use him.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
But I don't know. There was a lot of problems with that game. But I like. Also, what's awesome is he has a very. You mentioned the Joker, but he has the same thing as Joker's scars. Gin is his weakness, and also later on, was it smoking?
Would you have a cigar? It's my only weakness.
Yeah, have a cigar. It's my only weakness. And so you get the idea that all of the sins are his weakness.
Yes.
Anything that he wants it to be when he needs to seduce that certain person to do a thing. Then it really reminded me. I was like, oh man, it's totally like, Ledger's Joker. Like, oh yes, that's my only weakness. Whatever it is that will solidify this relationship in his benefit, he'll, oh well, it's my only weakness. I'll give it to you.
It's the running gag.
This time. It's really
There's
great.
There's another one where they're going up these steps in Frankenstein's laboratory, and he says something like, Frankenstein is leading Pretorius up, and Dr. Frankenstein says something like, be careful, the steps are slippery, and Dr. Pretorius goes, I think that's a charming touch, which is so strange.
He's great. I also like that the murderers are creeped out. Like, if they're like, man, I don't know if we can work with this guy. Straight up stone cold murderers who will murder women to take their bodies. They're like, this guy, man, I do not know. Like, this guy really creeps me out.
Well, I love his
great.
line when they're in the underground crypt. He's like, well, I'm paraphrasing. He's like, you two can go. I'm going to stay. I rather like it here.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic. Oh, also the use of the word "boochied." I was boochied. That's the word, and you're just like, what? Man, I have to look that up.
I know. I remember being like, what did he say?
It's
booted is the term for people who know too much.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's so
smart.
like he chews it up, and it's fantastic.
I like to imagine that Edward Van Sloan was the one that booted him out.
Yeah, I think
that'd be great.
That makes sense. Well, so Pretorius actually does two practical things. One is he shows that he has the skills to make another monster. He has skills that he can bring to this endeavor.
From seed.
Yeah. He organically grows monsters somehow. And the first ones he shows, he has grown a bunch of miniature people. And this is when the Frankenstein series from Universal just completely goes bonkers, because he hauls out something like 7 little mason jars with people in them.
It's the weirdest scene, and it really actually disturbed the crap out of me.
It's very disturbing. It is deeply disturbing. Because
you know what's funny is Rain nailed it. She goes, wow, so I guess he's just early stem cell research. Because to him, it creates the amount of organic.
I think that's right. I think he somehow has an ability. We don't see what kind of technology he uses, but he somehow has the ability to grab more organic matter of some kind and enter in some kind of order, some kind of design, and he gets out a human person in miniature in this case, and
a mermaid.
Yeah. So and a mermaid.
So
apparently, there's a baby. Originally, there was a baby in one, but
people just thought that was too weird.
Yeah.
But here's what's disturbing. He's got a little.
That's right out. We've done.
Well, Frankenstein hits the nail on the head. This isn't science. It's more like black magic.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
That's right. And Pretorius, at that point, is wearing his alchemy kind of cap. His study cap, and he's made these little people. They are conscious. They are living in little glass cages. I hope that they have.
Bell jars.
I hope they have brain damage to the extent that they have severe short-term memory loss.
And they were actually in bell jars, in the full-size bell jars when they filmed.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So because it's deeply disturbing to think that he's leaving these tiny human creatures just sort of locked up
in the dark. I mean, he covers them.
No, it's weird.
Also, he cares enough about blocking the king every chance he gets.
Yeah.
Well, it's really cool. It's super bizarre, like adding to the Frankenstein mythos, but it's an interesting political satire because he creates this king who's just like always after the queen. There's a pope who's ineffective. He operated this way, so I'm going to make him a pope, and like the satire of it all is extremely interesting, and how these characters play out. And I thought his little like menagerie is interesting, and just like I said, just a weird sidebar to the whole Frankenstein mythos, but it's a really neat one in that realm.
Well, yeah, and the way he's going to put this to use is that instead of them having to go and steal a brain, all of this whole sequence, this movie sure does take its time with big sequences that really accomplish like one plot point. But in this case, all of that with the tiny people in the jars is just to establish this guy can grow organic material and he's going to grow a brain. Ta-da! That's the point. Is that they're going to make a new body and they're going to grow a brain to put in it, and that brain will work better than the brains that they previously were stealing from the medical school. Because that's it, right? He's not going to make anything else. I don't think he's making a heart. I don't remember.
Well, he seems to be completely down for grave robbing. I hope her bones are firm.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
He's
Yeah.
fantastic there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think that he's decided that it's too much trouble to grow a whole body. You know, he's going to use his particular skills to grow a brain. You know.
Well, he does imply that he has a hard time achieving a full-size human. He says you did achieve size.
Yeah.
And and then some, really, when you think about the monster. But
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
What I am troubled with is they just make a perfectly functioning human brain, and they build. Okay, she's got some scars, but she's reasonably attractive. So we have this Amazon woman with a perfectly functioning human brain, and they want to pair her up with the monster who has a damaged brain.
Let's get to that in a sec, because we really quickly, let's cut back to the monster right now, because so that's what's going on with Pretorius and Frankenstein. This movie is real simple. It tracks. There's two columns. There's the column that follows Frankenstein and his friends, and there's the column that follows the monster and his friends. So now the monster has been wandering the countryside and has found his way into the home of the hermit. There's just that scene from the book that we talked about last episode. You know, and in the book, the monster comes to stay with the hermit. He like leaves food for them. You know, they think that he's some kind of brownie or something like that, but then they turn on him and run him off. This is kind of inspired by all of that, and this is something that, in my mind, I think you guys said this. The sequence where he wanders in and meets a blind man and all the stuff that happens after that, it takes up a huge chunk of this movie. So that means that no matter how much it keys into the plot or not, James Whale is giving us a huge percentage of the time, of the screen time of this monster is going to be spent here learning and growing with the blind hermit. And yes, I can't help but watch it and think of Young Frankenstein, Gene Hackman.
It's such a heartbreaking scene, though. I mean, it's such a heartbreaking scene.
Yeah, tell us, why is it heartbreaking?
Well, it's beautiful that this friendship, because I've been studying lately. I've been studying why, ostracism and rejection, and how it creates. I was watching this documentary about how students will be ostracized or rejected, and then they'll act out, and they'll become, some of the school shootings most of them have been somebody who was rejected, or people who are just kill themselves. And it's just that you actually have physical pain when you're rejected. So to have these two people who have both been ostracized for different reasons and are outcast, are completely alone in the world, to find each other, it's just so beautiful. And then to have that destroyed, it's just it's completely heartbreaking. I mean, regardless of whether or not the monster is a murderer who needs to be punished, it's still heartbreaking. Yeah.
Well, you have to think too. All the previous scenes of the monster or most of them have been chased or jailed or tormented in some way. There's a scene where he's basically crucified. I think you look at Pretorius and you look at these characters, and they're kind of extremes of opposites of each other in some ways, but they're both people who are outside the norm, and I think Whale really empathized with that, and I think that's, you see why he gave so much to this scene and why it still works today. It is really heartbreaking. It is really sad, and I always kind of wish that the monster would have looked harder for the blind hermit, and maybe if they had got got back together, none of the bad stuff that happens to the monster and the rest of the Frankenstein series, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe he just would have hung out with this guy and he would have become a more well-balanced kind of fellow.
Yeah.
And
that's
maybe
really where the tragedy comes in, is that whatever that he's really on the right path, because we've seen him act out. We've seen him do terrible things, the monster. But here, for the first time, somebody's educating him. Somebody's being the father that Dr. Frankenstein wasn't, and teaching him, to be good civil society, which at the time of this movie means being willing to sit by a fire and, shake hands, break bread, smoke, and drink.
Well, there's some really great moments, too. I mean, the music suits the Savage Beast kind of part.
Yeah.
The fact that the blind man is also willing to, a lot of people wandering out, he's got to suss out that not everybody who wanders through the forest is going to be necessarily a, good person or a person who's not an outcast from society. So he recognizes that. They have a strange tableau where they're just, the tableau where they're just kind of sitting there, hanging out, smoking. It's just such a weird and really just awesome and touching scene. The blind man gives one of the just most beautiful prayers written.
Yeah.
The screenwriter really, that prayer itself is just a really great part of all of that, and his, informs his character and how he will bond with the monster and everything. It's a really great scene, and then to have that too also destroyed by fire is just really heart-wrenching. And because people just come in and go, hey, by the way, all the stuff you've been doing, let me just tell you, we've decided this guy is awful and he's a murderer, and anything that you've done, there's no due process. We're gonna try to take him. We're definitely getting you out of here.
Yeah. And making things worse. And so the movie, I think it's clear, we're not misreading it. The movie believes that the hermit is the most right, I think we're supposed to be impressed with the hermit's faith and believe that even if the monster was an example of the sin of Dr. Frankenstein, where Dr. Frankenstein was not supposed to meddle in the ways of God, he has created this creature who is alive. And the way the hermit treats him, I believe the movie is telling us, is correct, is the correct way, is with sympathy and compassion and patience. But the movie also has a cynical side that says, however, you will probably fail because the world will screw you up. If I'm reading it right, because it's so. I completely believe in the hermit. I think he's on the right path. And then John Carradine comes in and sets everything on fire. Which is just so strange, by the way, to have Carradine walk in for. Was Carradine a star at this point? Is that?
No, he was just sort of kind of a, like, he was at the earlier part of his career. Yeah, like this was the sort of part he was ranking at this time, which is more of like a walk on. He had some dialogue, and that was that.
You can't miss him with that voice,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and eventually he becomes Dracula. So.
Yeah. In this series, he'll be back in this series as Dracula. So bizarre, He is. John Carradine is literally nobody's idea of Bela Lugosi, and yet he's the one who's going to walk into that role next, which is fine. Fine with me. He's better than Lon Chaney Jr. Seriously, the son of Dracula, which really isn't even about the son, it's about Dracula. Has Lon Chaney Jr. as Dracula, and Lon Chaney Jr. is the most absurd Dracula that you ever saw.
I think I may just be my residual affection for him because of the Wolfman, but I'll take him over John Carradine. I'm not particularly a fan of his Dracula, but I know a lot of people are. So,
Carradine doesn't do much. Look, you know what? We'll get to that. Maybe, eventually, hopefully, we'll get to that. But Carradine doesn't really actually get to do a great deal as Dracula. I'm just saying that out of all the things that Lon Chaney makes me believe that he can inhabit, Dracula is not among them. But anyway, we may very well someday get to the Monster Mash films. So one thing that we see happen is the monster saves. Go ahead.
The monster,
how does the monster wind up in the hands of the mob? If I recall, he saves the shepherdess, right?
That's all prior to this.
Oh yes.
That's all prior to this. That's what's leading up to this, and he gets tormented a lot. And we are led to believe that there are more murders throughout the village. Now, the interesting thing about that is actually there is an entire subplot of this film that was cut.
Oh yeah.
And it was the Dwight Fry character, the same actor that played Fritz, the Hunchback, in the first movie, is back as one of the grave robbers in this. And there was an entire subplot about him murdering people and framing the monster. So a lot of the people killed in this movie, one can assume that the characters that are killed off screen were killed by Dwight Fry.
That is amazing. I had no idea. I've never heard of that subplot. That's really fast. I thought that it was
cutting room floor, my friend.
No, I believe you. I'm just thinking that I was thinking this was like the Hulk, where the Hulk just goes around killing. The Hulk doesn't know any better, really. He's big. If you get hit in the chest by the Frankenstein monster, you will die. There's very little likelihood that you could survive, being just. So he could just sweep you out of the way and toss you into a tree.
And I'm sure some of the people, and I'm sure the people you see him, there's the people you see him clobber while on screen, but then there's when they're having the sort of scene in the village where people are running around and they find people who have been pummeled.
That's right.
Apparently, those were people that were killed by Dwight Fry's character.
Well, that's amazing. I buy that. There's this amazing thing here where the monster is now off, and I like this. Okay, this is not a problem. But as Tony was pointing out, we have now at this point entered a whole nother universe, far, far away from the original novel, which is fine. But we're in a whole other universe. This monster has its own story that it's going after. It has different thoughts, different needs. We have nothing to do with the Mary Shelley universe anymore, except to the extent that sometimes there will be themes that maybe Shelley suggested or what have you. So,
and I mean he becomes, Pretorius convinces him like, hey, I'll get you a friend. It'll be this girl who I grow out of these bones that I'm hanging out having dinner with because he's a creep. Yeah. And
as we move into the third act, these two plots come together, right?
Yeah.
Well, that great cemetery with all the crooked graves. The scene of the monster just sort of terracing through it. It's beautiful to look at, but I love the whole interaction between this first interaction with Pretorius, who actually takes the right attitude of with the monster. He has the same thing as the blind guy does, only he has much more wicked intention. Is that he doesn't act scared of the monster. He's just like, oh, hello. He's not intimidated. He's completely calm. And, he actually, he even's kind of making fun of the monster, but the monster doesn't pick up on it. And he convinces him, well, no, I'm going to make a woman. And I love the sort of, and this is, again, why I kind of think of him as a teenager, this sort of lustful inflection of Karloff going, friend, and then you see him roll the word off his mouth, wife. And you know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Well, and here is a question I asked Jason. I'm like, is he fully functional as a man?
Sexually? I mean, we're given to believe so, yeah. I mean, there's no reason not to think so.
Because if so, then that's pretty scarifying that she's like...
well, I mean, that whole plot, they want to breed them. That's why they're doing it.
They want to make them obviously. These are some scary... Yeah. No, there's something...
This is some eugenics stuff right here. It's like necromancy and eugenics at the same time.
It's dank and sleazy what these guys want to do. I mean, if in a much darker movie, these guys are like some of the worst of that company that keeps throwing Ripley at the aliens, because they're like, yeah, man, we're gonna breed monsters and make more monsters, and that. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that they could reproduce that way, but they'd have to make them themselves.
Well, there is the
why?
Well, his plan is
What?
to get them together and make more monsters.
This is actually a plot in the book.
Clear.
This one.
Wow.
This one does go back to the book, by the way. Remember, the monster in the book is both more innocent, but he's more fully human. So many times he's much more conniving and mean. He grabs Frankenstein. He says, "I will stop tormenting you if you will make me a bride." So Frankenstein hangs out in the Orkney Islands and makes a bride. And the monster just sort of, the impression you get is the monster is literally just leaned against the wall, just sort of burrowing eye holes into Frankenstein's back while he makes this bride. That goes on for a while. Then finally, Frankenstein's finished, and he's more or less satisfied with the results. And then he's so repulsed by the fact that he's doing such a horrible thing, is because he envisions the world overrun with the offspring of these creatures. So in that case, he fully fears it'll happen, and so he then destroys the bride that he has just made immediately. And then the monster is just enraged, and that leads you to the end of the book. But so in that book and in this movie, there is completely the notion that once they set these guys free, yes, they will mate, and yes, they will overrun the world with little baby monsters. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's super disturbing. No, she's like, I mean, she just looks at him and screams.
Okay, let's talk about her. Yeah,
she hisses. She said she was impersonating the swans in the park when she was doing all that, because she thinks they're terrifying.
Well, she did a very good job about this. The first time I watched it with Jamie, without even knowing that, she said she reminds me of a bird.
Isn't she neat?
Well, and she's on like 1.5 foot high stilts and all taped up.
Yeah,
it's crazy. In fact, one of her body doubles actually freaked out with claustrophobia because she was so taped up for that.
Really?
Yeah. And
no, she's amazing. And you know, when you think about it, I don't know what James Whale gave her. I don't know what he said. Hey, here's what your character is. Here's how you should act. But she's not doing anything Karloff does. You know, so she is a Frankenstein monster, but she's not the same. You know, and I love how her whole body moves. Like when she hears something, she'll like sort of slowly spin around, and then her head will kind of spin after it. You know, and obviously that's also because the actor is taped up and is on stilts, so she's not going to be able to move very, very fluidly. Oh, it's perfect. You know, her little chin moves, and I love when she sees him. Oh, God. When the monster sees him, Drew, you want to tell us about when the monster's been waiting in the waiting room?
Well, the monster has just gone upstairs. He's tossed Dwight. Dwight probably gets to be killed by the Frankenstein monster twice.
Yeah.
But he's just tossed him off the side of the building, and you know, they had the big production number creation scene and remove her gauze around her eyes to see that the eyes are open. Colin Clive gets to say she's alive. They unbandage her. Ernest Messenger, Dr. Pretorius, very dramatically says, "The Bride of Frankenstein." And they had the Franz Waxman score hits the sort of almost wedding march like theme right there. And then Karloff comes in, and the very first thing she does is stumble backwards and scream. And it's both heartbreaking and funny at the same time, because of course she thinks he's as awful as everybody else. And that's really kind of sad when you think about it, because she was literally made
totally right.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. It is hard. You said it exactly right. And in fact, that's one of the great things about a lot of times movies like this, where the fact that something is so funny is what makes it so painful, and vice versa. You that comedy gives us a lot of extra tragedy. It is amazing. Yeah, she screams. You want to laugh, and yet it's also just so awful. And you kind of wish that the monster could just figure out a way to like walk the earth and slowly like grow and come to some realizations and understand the world.
You want like the kung fu version of Frankenstein's monster, where instead of Carradine, it's Frankenstein. So, well, I guess that and the Hulk. I guess that's kind of what the Hulk is.
Yes, that's right.
What's bizarre to me
Banner
is that I've always thought of Elsa Lanchester as Katie Nana from Mary Poppins.
Is that so?
That's how I grew up. I watched that movie a million times. So to see her in this role is so bizarre.
Wait,
well, it's interesting about the bride. Yeah. What's interesting about the bride is she is one of the few iconic female monsters. Like you don't, there isn't a lot of them. I mean, I think of there's the Alien Queen, which is only female in like the vaguest of sense. It's an animal. It's not relatable like the bride is.
Yeah.
The
reptile.
Yeah, but like the Bride of Frankenstein is a lot like the monster himself. It's like if you were to put that, there's reverberations of this character that are still going on, and if you put that hairstyle, the weird Nefertiti, hairdo on anybody, people know exactly what that is. Like the Bride of Frankenstein, even for people who have not seen this movie,
no, you're right.
I would never even think
Nicki
to
Minaj
do.
wore this on SNL like just a couple of months ago. There was nobody in the audience who didn't know who Nicki Minaj was pretending to be. You're absolutely right.
Right, and they did that by putting this cage in her. This what do you call it? I'm trying to find the name of what they called it. The horse. What did they call it? Anyway, she is like one of the only monsters, if not the only monster, who doesn't kill anybody.
Yeah, I guess she just shows up and then that's
Although in a roundabout way, she sure kills Dr. Pretorius by breaking the monster's heart.
That gets us to the end, and this is the point
where...
where...
let me tell you, it's called a wired horsehair cage is what they put in her hair.
So that's the beehive that they build the beehive around, right? I mean, when there's that point, Neil Gaiman calls it fairy tale-like, and I guess that's true, because all of a sudden, the monster is so ticked off and has finally figured out in the closed circuit that this world is. The monster has figured out the way the world works, and so he for some reason he spares
Frankenstein because he sees his own the true bride of Frankenstein, Elizabeth, comes to get him from the take the thing, and he has the best line in the movie. You go, you live, you stay. We belong dead.
We belong dead.
Yeah.
And he pulls a lever that for no reason is a lever that is
right, and how does he even know?
Well, Pretorius, he's about to pull it. Who knows why he's got it? But Pretorius says, no, if you pull that lever, you'll blow up the whole... I don't know why you make such a lever.
Right, exactly.
Unless you're, going to try to blow it up before the Germans come.
These are mad scientists.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, they're mad. Yes, that's excellent.
Your garden variety scientist might not do that. Your garden variety scientist would not be making monsters out of dead people.
So he's like, well, now that I know this is the We Belong Dead switch, he pulls it and they blow up and that's the end of the movie.
The auto self-destruct or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, and that's the end of the film. So, and that's fabulous. I mean, I have nothing else to say about the plot. I mean, we should probably get our closing thoughts and then move over to endorsements. But okay, Tony, we've gone through a lot of the weirdness. Tell me where you're. I mean, I know that you enjoyed this film to begin with, but nevertheless, what are your final thoughts on Brides of Frankenstein?
Well, I mean, it is
Brides of
like
Dracula,
stranger than Dracula on the brain.
Get it together, man.
I didn't say Dracula this time. I said Frankenstein.
That's not what I heard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, me too. I'm pretty sure you said Dracula. We can play it back. Do instant replay.
You know what? The audience will let us know.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Way
Tony.
to not research and be pretentious, Jason. I mean, seriously. Jeez, man.
Oh man, we're gonna get a Facebook message about that.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it does such weird stuff with the little people, and just the way it veers from the books is it just makes it its own thing, and definitely that's not bad. It's just so much stranger than I remembered. I just remembered the second one in my head, it just hewed closer. Like, it's they just took those parts of the book and put it back together. That's definitely not what happens. But it's there's so many great pieces, and the bride is one of the most iconic horror figures ever. There's a cosplayer who goes by Lady Graves, and she, it was striking. She's done the Bride of Frankenstein, and it's really striking how much she looks like. She's got the facial structure, everything. It's really bizarre because I know she had done it, and then I was watching this wow, that was super perfect. But anytime something, it's like what you're saying, anytime somebody puts on that wig, it's, exactly, even if you've never seen this movie ever, you've heard by it through, 80 years worth of this being around. You know exactly what that is. It's in our Western lexicon, if not beyond, or a visual lexicon anyway. So, it's so great. The sets are great. Cinematography's great. Effects are awesome. Really great bits. It's got to be in your horror, must watch every year. I think if you're going to watch a bunch of horror movies in, around Halloween, this is one of them that's well worth having in your collection to watch. It's done really great. So I liked revisiting it. It was just a lot different since I hadn't seen it in a while, it was a lot different than I had remembered, but for a lot of good reasons, too.
Sure. Excellent. Drew?
I love this movie. I'm glad we finally did an episode on it. I'm actually looking at several images of the Bride of Frankenstein in my apartment right now as I talk about this, so I am a huge fan of not only the Universal monsters, but this movie in particular. I love the way that Whale injected his own sensibilities into Shelley's initial idea. And Universal Frankenstein is its own thing, but as I said in the initial episode, I actually prefer the Universal Frankenstein over Mary Shelley. I mean, this is, when I think of Frankenstein, this is what I think of. And I love this incarnation of it. And I read the book every so often, but I revisit these films, yearly, sometimes multiple times a year. I think this is such an iconic film. And, like Tony was saying, this is a movie that if you want to be well-versed in the horror genre, this is a movie that you need to see. And honestly, unlike a lot of films from the 30s that I don't know how well they would play to people who aren't into older films, I think this is one that would play well to a lot of people because it does also have a lot of comedy in it. So, it's tongue-in-cheek. It makes fun of itself while still being a very, very good horror film, and arguably the best horror film ever made. I mean, there's a lot of people that would make that claim, and I some days I feel that way about it myself.
Wow, excellent. Julia, what are your final thoughts?
I mean, I think, like I said, I think we've already kind of hit everything. It's a classic film. It's beautiful. It's surprising. It's not what I expected it to be, and I'm glad we watched it.
It's wonderful to watch these two together and to see Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, where Universal really is hitting its stride and many would say that it's also kind of the beginning of the end. But that because 35, we're now 4 years after the original Frankenstein and Dracula. But boy, this is a good film. It is, I think, a superior film to the original Frankenstein. It's beautiful to look at. It's beautiful to listen to. There's so many interesting choices, and like Tony and Drew both said, it's going off in its own direction and it's creating its own legend of Frankenstein that really is the one that a lot of us, that is kind of burned into our collective memory, and I think that's fabulous. And it also makes me amazed. If this is 1935, then when Curse of Frankenstein comes around in 1957, that's only 22 years later. 22 years is not a lot of time to dare to just completely reinvent something, and that makes
obviously you haven't been exposed to this cycle of remake Spider-Man in 2 years later or whatever.
Well, it's a good point, and in fact, another big example I could come up with is 1931. They did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, starring Frederick March, and then they did it again with Spencer Tracy literally 10 years later. So, okay, all right. But that was like a shot-for-shot remake.
It's also again, people didn't have the home video market. They didn't have streaming. Sure. They weren't able to revisit movies the way we are.
Right.
We do now. Having a different version come out within a decade or so's time is not, in some ways that's prudent because you have something with name value like Frankenstein or, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah,
which is, still the business practice of today, but also, people might not be able to see those older versions, but they can see the new one.
Yeah. It's remarkable to think, by the way, that, for instance, Robert Downey has been playing Iron Man for 8 years now. I mean, it's almost to the point where it's almost, for any other series, you would say that it's almost reboot time to hit that point. There we go. So, gosh, I got nothing else to say. It was really, really fun, but I can't wait to explore this world a little bit more next week with Son of Frankenstein, because that's going to give us, we can sort of comment on what we've learned about the Universal.
Plus we finally get to meet Igor properly.
Yes, indeed. We meet Igor, and we meet the costume of the monster that was always my favorite when I was a kid. Absolutely. Every time that I got a Frankenstein monster action figure, I created for him an extra little piece of the costume that we're going to get in the next movie that I think is very important. So, and it's not sunglasses. It is.
Aw. Spoilers. And
so,
sadness.
okay. All right. Do we have any endorsements this week? I have no idea if anybody has endorsements, but I'm dying to find out. The same order: Tony, Drew, Julia, and then I'll go. Tony, do you have any endorsements?
A couple. Well, I'm glad that Shin Godzilla got an extra week in the theater. So thanks to everyone who went out and at least checked it out, whether it was your cup of tea or not. I was kind of stoked about that.
Is it true that Godzilla can shoot lasers out of his tail?
Man, you have to see that scene.
I don't know how I feel about that.
No, you have to see it.
I'm going to see it. I'm not going to see it. I'm not saying I'm going to see it, but I'm saying I don't know how I feel about it.
Well, again, when you view that part, you will understand what's going on, and it's pretty cool.
Okay.
But,
Fair enough.
Yeah. You have to, when you hear it, you're like, what? Like, when you just said it, that's not something, I tried to go in, totally clean, and I didn't hear any of that, right? But when you hear it, you're like, what? And then you see that part. Somebody was posting screenshots, and I don't mean that they were wrong. I was trying to avoid that because I wanted, after seeing it at Fantastic Fest, I was like, everybody just needs to see this without any prior anything and just go, holy moly, that is the thing that just happened. Because it's pretty insane. So, yeah. I was really happy about that.
I will keep an open, because you said this, I will keep an open mind.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything else. So, but you have an extra week, although maybe that's this week. So when you get a chance, that's what to do. But, yeah, and this marks, we were talking in kind of pre-show, Rain and I's band, Rise from Fire, we're playing the night before Halloween on the 30th, and this is the first time, it'll be our anniversary on the 29th, that we've gotten to play together as musicians, and especially in the same band, as an anniversary thing. So we're doing that.
That is so cool. I love that.
Yeah, so that's going to be pretty cool. That'll be at Beerland. Doors are at 9. But yeah, Witch Crier, some good friends of ours who are really awesome are playing, and my friends who are also good friends, Awesome Death, who do crazy music and also have a theremin, which, prominently in horror land.
Those are cool.
So it's going to be a crazy night, and that's really cool. So we're going to do that. I'm trying to think. I haven't watched it, but I've been eyeing on my shelf. I hadn't had time because I've been working on tech on Ruby so we could release our first episode. I have been eyeing the Exorcist 3 Blu-ray that Shout Factory produced, and I am really waiting to crack that open because it looks really awesome. Has the work print, has all kinds of extra features. New artwork is gorgeous. Exorcist 3 is one of my favorite horror movies. So I'm going to say that without having seen the contents and just viewing what the contents are, that looks like a really great disc. So I'm super stoked when I have some amount of time, I'm not sure when that is, to crack that open because it's going to be rad.
Awesome. Drew, did you have any endorsements for us?
Yeah, I have a couple things. One, all 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful is now on Netflix. You have no excuse. A lot of what we have been talking about, the Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, it's all on the show. It's Universal, it's Hammer, it's all of these things that you like, but it's a TV show, and it's a very well-done TV show. They just put up the 3rd season, which plays heavily into Dracula, also the Wolfman. There's huge chunks of the Wolfman in this season, although reinvented and filtered into a spaghetti western, which is fascinating. But I will say this also, Rory Kinnear, the guy that plays Frankenstein's monster on the show, it's probably my second favorite version of Frankenstein's monster. He hews very closely to Shelley. He's not the Karloff version at all, but he's just as frightening and just as sympathetic, and I've greatly enjoyed it. I'm very sad that the show only got 3 seasons, but I'm hoping if people continue to discover it on Netflix that maybe we'll get a revival. So if you like the Universal monsters and you're wanting to see an interesting shared universe with all those characters, it exists. It's on Netflix. It's there right now, and I guarantee you it's 1,000 times better than the actual shared universe that Universal is currently plotting to do in film. But also, and selfishly so, Comixology is having their Halloween horror sale, and Halloween Man is included in that. It's all of the issues except for the 2 newest ones, which I've had 2 new issues that came out in the last 2 months. So if you have been reading it and would like something new to read, there is some new stuff up there for you to check out. If you have not read it yet, well, here's your chance to get in and dig into it. I mean, some of the issues are up there for only 99 cents. right now. So, I mean, come on, that's dirt cheap. So go on to Comixology and check out Halloween Man. I mean, it's Halloween week. What the hell are you waiting for?
Excellent. Julia, what do you got?
Gosh, I wish I had something Halloween appropriate to endorse. I can't think of anything new that I have enjoyed, so I'm just gonna go back to re-endorsing Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is back for a new season. Whole different kind of scary. She's a whole different kind of scary.
She is, yeah.
Bizarre and hilarious. It's a very creative, fresh, fun show, and if you have not seen it, you should check it out.
Yes. The only thing that I will endorse, I mean, Julia's right. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is wonderful, and I'm thrilled that it's back. But I'm going to endorse Jack Chick, who left us this week. Thank God. Man, Tony and I have had so much fun loving the insane.
Well, I will say that I should not. It is perhaps in bad course to speak ill of the dead.
I swear I'm not.
The amount of stuff that Jack Chick and his ilk foisted upon people, it's really hard for me to say, as an endorsement, I will miss Jack Chick. I think
all I'm saying is that if you, I don't even know how to do this. Okay, you should check out the cartoons that Jack Chick began writing back in the 60s, I guess, and 70s. I remember finding them when I was a kid in the 70s. Jack Chick was a fundamentalist Christian of an extremely fundamentalist splinter group ilk, and he was obsessed with the notion that if you weren't saved in the way that he imagined that would be, and this was in a way that was very familiar to people who grew up around Protestants, hardcore fundy Protestants back in the day, then you would go to hell. And his vision of hell and heaven and all of that was just amazing. I mean, he was really a pretty interesting visionary. He had these visions of like what I think that the Jack Chick tracked, and they were always in these cartoon tracks that you would get for free, and they were fantastic. I knew people in college who were like, Orthodox Jews who collected these things because they just found them fascinating. There was one.
Well, they're fascinating in the amount of just pure hatred and vitriol that they espouse, and it would be funny. Again, I've laughed at them, but it would be a lot more hilarious if swaths of the country didn't believe exactly the hatred and terrible things that Jack Chick tracks espoused. That would be great. You could laugh more.
You're saying
if there weren't a huge swath of the Bible Belt that believed that dinosaurs were fake and put there to test people's faith, and that the Jews were terrible, and that anybody who listened to metal was going straight to hell, that everything that you possibly did, the Catholics were idolaters and terrible, hellish people, that all of that stuff, it would be really hilarious if it stayed in the realm of like, this guy's crazy, we don't believe this, except that it didn't. And that's the part that makes it really hard for me to go like, that Jack Chick, we're going to miss that lovable card. Because it's simply not true. That's the part. It's funny to collect them, and you can be ironic about it until you've been to an area where people truly believe those and pass those out as if they are the second gospel in comic book form.
But I have complete compassion for where you're coming from. But I know, Tony, that I know that you've found humor in these things before.
Oh, of course. It's got the worst. It's got the worst metal lyrics ever. Rock, 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 rock with the rock.
Yeah,
as if nothing he could find in the pantheon of metal lyrics could possibly. He's like, I'll just throw this out. No, I mean, there's humor again in the like simplistic, weird ass nature of what he was saying, but again, it's tempered by the fact that I always have to think about that Jack Chick, the hatred and terribleness that he espoused was picked up by many, many people. That is unconscionable, and that's why I just can't be like, he was so silly. That Jack Chick was silly.
If I may, let's say this. Go ahead. Yeah.
If we are to mourn a comic book creator that has passed in the last few days, let us focus our energy on Steve Dillon,
who is
arguably the definitive artist of the Punisher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait. So I totally agree, but I'm just saying. Look, I'm not saying mourn Jack Chick. I swear to God. And Tony.
I would dance on his grave and possibly urinate on it, sir.
But that's not. I'm not. I have no love for Jack Chick. I'm just saying that if you want to understand a lot about American culture and all the stuff that Tony's talking about, and sort of what defined post-war America, especially post-war Middle American Protestantism, Jack Chick blows your mind. I mean, because
the fact it was seen as gospel is what's just like, holy crap, and it's
there was one
scary.
that scared the hell out of me when I was a kid, because it was called "This Was Your Life," and it has this guy.
Oh yeah.
He's living a worldly life. Their words, okay? He's like whoring it up, and he's gambling and drinking and smoking and doing all this stuff, right? And because like fundamentalist Christianity has a lot in common with fundamentalist Islam in this way. You know, he's doing all these things, and then he dies, and then he winds up on This Is Your Life, where they literally play on a giant drive-in movie screen all the things, all the terrible, terrible things that he did when he was alive. And God had hidden cameras everywhere, and they're playing it on this giant screen for the afterlife, which now strikes me as a really funny idea. At the time, I was appalled. And
oh, of course.
Like, holy God, that's terrible. And then, you know, what's going to happen? He's doomed. He goes to hell. He's going to burn in hell forever. But if I recall, he gets a last chance. It turns out to be a dream, and he has a chance to turn himself over to Jesus. And so they move on to the next one, which I think was about don't let your kids play D&D. But,
oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, again, would be funny if people didn't try to, beat up
right.
and
totally,
destroy
totally,
people.
Totally
right.
With that in mind, I now declare my jack-o'-lantern, which I made in the image of a beholder from Dungeons & Dragons, that is in honor of Jack Chick.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I will have to say, like, what is funny though is, a lot of there's a traditional Jack Chick style, and then there are ones where he got actually really good comic book artists. And he's
so right.
Strange
I've been talking about it from back in the day, but he's had a lot of artists since then. I don't even recognize some of the new ones, and they're less charming to me because they're not part of that bizarre ass past, of the 70s that was just very strange. Anyway, the art often changed. So yes, I know Dylan passed away. And I'm talking about Jack Chick, but it's just such a strange part of the universe. So, and
True.
That's it for this week. I cannot wait to be back next week with Son of Frankenstein. It is going to be a blast, and this is a really fun retrospective. So, guys, I hope you have a fantastic evening. Those of you listening, please
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween.
Have a happy and safe Halloween. Leave us comments on the Facebook page. Leave reviews on iTunes, please. We absolutely love it when you do. And we want to hear from you. Have a fantastic week. Bye, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Later.
Night.